If I may put you right on one thing, Bongoland is actually Y086ET, and if you Google that code, you'll find it. I only found that out myself the other day. Great thing about politics is that tonight it's the Oxford Union, and I'm very flattered to be invited, and tomorrow night it's Pocklington Rugby Club's anniversary dinner, and I rather suspect on both occasions I will be the worst for wear. Can I just again, as our introducing speaker suggested, draw your attention to the actual motion here. The motion isn't about whether immigration is a good or bad thing. Immigration, of course, is like the curate's egg. It's good in parts. So I would argue that we must pay attention to that particular motion, and the motion being we've had too much immigration since the war. I wouldn't even argue that myself. I would say perhaps we've had too much immigration in the last 20 or 30 years. I'm married into a Polish immigrant family. My father-in-law finished up after the war. He was a tank commander with the 1st Polish Armoured Division. He was a successful businessman, successful enough to send 2 children through public school. He was a pillar of the community and a great benefactor of a charity. Who would suggest for one moment he wasn't welcome? Certainly not me. And of course we look back historically, don't we? We look back at those turbulent times in Europe and we see those religious refugees who came to us, and they brought their skills, their goldsmiths and silversmiths, which parts of London and that part of London in and around Hatton Garden still benefit today. Who would suggest that they weren't welcome? Certainly not me. What about the people from the Low Countries who showed us how to drain the fens, East Anglia, producing some of the most fertile farmland in the country, if not Europe? So successful now is that part of the world, rumour has it they have a university in the fens. I shit you not. Be that as it may. And of course, after the war, we saw the West Indians come across, and I lived in South London when they came in significant numbers because we couldn't man our health service and we couldn't man our transport services. Wonderful people, yes indeed, my lord. They loved cricket, and all the better for that in my view. They were God-fearing, family-valued, really, really nice people, and I lived amongst them. I counted a number of them as my friends. And in point of fact, they turned dominoes into a spectator sport. Who would suggest for one moment that they weren't welcome? Certainly not me. Certainly not me. And then, of course, for those of you old enough to remember, we had that beastly regime in Uganda who threw out those hard-working Asians who came to us with all that entrepreneurial spirit, that integration spirit that they brought here, and they've done so well, haven't we? So many of those families that came to us have done so well. Who would for a moment say that they weren't welcome? Not me. Certainly not me. But what I would suggest is we've got to acknowledge some things that are simply a fact of life. This is one of the most crowded pieces of real estate on the face of the planet. We are just full. Now, I'm a libertarian, I'm a classical liberal. You might argue, well, goodness me, what's Bloom doing arguing against free movement of labour? Well, generally speaking, in a pure economic sense, I wouldn't be, but we have a welfare state. For worse, not for better in my view. But we have moved miles away from Beveridge, where we have a social network that produces cradle-to-grave pensions, social security, health, education. None of these things I would go for myself as a neo-Austrian economist. I'd get rid of the lot, but we are where we are. So when you bring significant numbers in, they are then going to expect, quite rightly and quite naturally, and the noble lord makes the point, we're a fair nation, we're quite right, we should extend these facilities if they are there and if that is appropriate. But of course, they can come and they are welcome, and I know how hardworking in my constituency they are and how well received they are and how well thought of they are. But if they stay, and of course many will, like my father-in-law, eventually they will want their pensions, their state education, and all the other things that go with a modern welfare state. And you may or may not make the argument for economic advancement, for immigration, and I'm not here to make that argument for or against. And I don't really think that matters particularly. We know just down the road outside Oxford, they're already beginning to concrete over greenfield sites. The government tell us we need another 200,000 dwellings a year. Well, I don't want my nation, my beautiful island, concreted right over to tweak up GDP by another 0.5% a year, thank you very much. I don't want, representing a Yorkshire constituency, significant amounts of immigration from wherever it comes when I have 30% youth unemployment in the north of England. It doesn't make any economic sense at all. What we need, of course, is a system where we work out who we want to come in, who we know who comes in, and they apply like any other civilized country on the face of the planet. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Perfectly reasonable. If we need that skill, we bring people in. But an open door policy is a recipe for disaster, and the people that it will affect most are those immigrant families, like the one I married into, who have been here for a generation. They're the people, because people will not distinguish between who is new, who is old, who's adding to the community, who isn't adding to the community. And like the noble lord, I don't believe for 1 minute most immigrants come here for welfare benefits. That would be absurd.
Thank you. You mention adding to the community, yet you propose to get rid of welfare. How would that add to your community that you represent when you get rid of welfare? And is that UKIP policy?
Well, firstly, it will have escaped your notice perhaps I'm now an independent, not UKIP. And I would very happily come back and debate the advantages or disadvantages of a welfare state. But tonight that's not the debate. The debate is, the motion is, this country has seen too much immigration since the war. That is the motion, and I commend it to the House.